Broughan.
Thanks, Cian. Well, earlier on, Tánaiste, of course, we had the summer economic statements, but perhaps the biggest challenge facing the country is the massive size of Ireland's national debt and the huge chimney stacks of debt, as they're called, which must be refinanced in 2018-2020. The 2016 NTMA annual report and the annual report on public debt in Ireland of the Department of Finance, they make clear that our national debt is the elephant in the room of national Irish finances. At the end of 2016, general government debt stood at €201 billion, which represents between 42,000 and 46,000 euros for every man, woman and child in the country. National debt, of course, then represented 274% of general government revenue and was nearly 250% of the national wage bill. So by these measures, Tánaiste, Ireland remains one of the most indebted countries in the world, alongside Japan, Portugal and Greece. Indeed, on the new reference point we have, GNI star, our national debt is 100%. The stacks of debt from the crash years, of course, have to be refinanced in 2018-2020, when 5 benchmark bonds are due to mature. The total balance outstanding on these bonds is currently over €42 billion. The majority of the bilateral loans received from the UK, Sweden and Denmark after the crash, of course, also mature over the same period. So the total refinancing amount, Tánaiste, is over €46 billion. Now, many economists believe that the huge refinancing of 2018-2020 carries terrible risks, given the emerging fiscal unknowns in this country. Professor Colin Fitzgerald, for example, of the School of Mathematics and Statistics in UCD, he'd like the government and Anti-May to take immediate action to refinance the 50 billion bonds maturing in the next 3 years, since bond yields are low but are definitely rising. He and other concerned citizens, of course, referenced the warnings given in 2006-07 by people like Morgan Kelly. Obviously, Ireland is moving into an era of great uncertainty. Almost every day we are startled by another emerging impact of Brexit, as recently with fisheries. The IFAC, the Fiscal Council, has rightly warned of the vulnerability of corporation tax receipts, now 15% of our tax, twice the EU average, of course, and a bit reminiscent of stamp duties before 2008. But most of all, Professor Fitzgerald and other academic economists are worried by the growing asset price bubble being driven by the QE programme, quantitative easing programme, of the European Central Bank since March 2015. That programme has been tapered down, of course, to 60 billion a month and is expected to end in spring 2018. QE is printing money, of course, Tánaiste, to primarily benefit the wealthy in society, those with bonds and other assets whose prices increase, leading to bubbles and suffering for ordinary citizens, people trying to buy houses, for example. But the double whammy of QE, of course, is that quantitative easing will be followed, as night follows day, with quantitative tightening, as is happening in the United States, and indeed with higher interest rates. So will the government encourage or direct the National Treasury Management Agency to refinance those stacks of debts amounting to over 46 billion, or a quarter of total debt, as urgently as possible while interest rates are low and given the worrying risks in our external economic environment? Thanks, Cian.
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Thank you. Well, Deputy, I'd ask you to recognise the progress that has been made. You didn't support many of the policies that got us to the point where our economy is now doing as well as it is, and where we've seen a drop. Didn't support many of them, and we've now come from 15% unemployment down to 6%. What I would say to you about the NTMA is that they're an extremely professional body who have managed us through the crisis, who've overseen a situation where we've moved from being charged 14% interest rates down to 1%. And I would have confidence in them to continue to manage the debt. And the very fact that the economy is now in the position that it is in is extremely important in terms of the rates that we can borrow at, which means that we can continue to have a balanced approach to dealing with our debt, which of course we have to do, but also to continue. You'd be the very person who would be calling for investment in infrastructure and in our social services. And that's what we have to do. We have to get that balance between managing the debt, bringing the debt to GDP ratio down, and continuing the investment that is so necessary. And that's the approach that the government are taking, and that's what Minister O'Donoghue has made very clear yesterday when he was speaking about the summer economic statement. that does set out a very practical approach and a very careful and prudent management of our economy, while at the same time making sure that we invest in the kind of services that are necessary, that we negotiate pay agreements that are manageable and that we can afford, and primarily that we make the kind of decisions that will ensure that our citizens will have quality of life, because there will be a good transport infrastructure and good services in the areas of health and education and other areas. Just this week we made the decision to invest, for example, in more SNAs in our schools. That's the kind of decision that we can make because we have the right approach to managing the economy, managing the debt and making sure that we can continue to invest.
Deputy Broughan.
You haven't remotely answered the question. I mean, we spent over 40 billion in interest repayments since 2008-09, which your party and Fianna Fáil got us into. And even this year, there's a 7 billion expenditure, almost the Department of Education spend, which you can't even discuss because it goes straight to central fund. Now, I'm well aware of efforts by Anti-May to reduce risks to Ireland in the refinancing of the 2018-2020 bonds. They speak in their 2016 report I have here in front of me of locking in low interest rates and longer maturities while interest rates remain at historically low levels. I know the overall global figure. They've got it down from something like 70 million to 46 million. They recently, I know last year, issued a 100-year bond, which was a first for our country. And of course they have 21 billion in the kitty right now. I have to say, by the way, just a few weeks ago, Tánaiste, Mr Conor O'Kelly, who's the CEO and the Director of Funding, Mr Frank O'Connor, came into Dáil Éireann to brief me extensively on this matter. But Professor Fitzgerald and others still fear that the government and NTMA, they're taking too much of an accounting rather than an actuarial approach to national debt. We've seen increase in asset prices fuelled by QE and the likely interest rate and fiscal shocks when the money pump is turned off. So nobody can predict, Tánaiste, the impact of the unstable Trump presidency. If Britain leaves in March 2019, clearly our economy will be in some danger. So we could be entering, Tánaiste, a perfect fiscal storm with a danger, even some economists feel, of a return to the Troika. So will you ask the Minister for Finance and the Taoiseach perhaps to meet NTMA and encourage them to move fast on 2018-2020? It's a serious matter, Deputy Broughan, by the way, because you know, the next government at least will have to deal with this.
Well, Deputy, I mean, what I have to say to you is that of course we had to borrow in recent years because we wanted to protect our investment in public services. That's what you would have wanted, and most people in this House would support us borrowing in order to continue the investment during a period of crisis. Of course we had to do that. And you know, the important point, yes, but the important point is that we were able to borrow at rates that were very manageable, and because of government action and because of the fact that our reputation has been restored, we've been able to borrow at rates that are sustainable and have seen them going from 14% down to 1%. So, Deputy, you should recognise the unemployment rate has gone from 15 down to 6. That makes a difference to your constituents, and they want to see the public services being maintained. And the prudent management of the economy has allowed us to do that.